Go ahead and get started, everyone. So welcome everybody to our CARMs preparatory seminar. So it's being held obviously by us, Black Physicians of Ontario, and we thank everyone for coming, and hopefully the seminar will give everybody good advice and help you in the stages moving forward. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll go to the next slide. So I'm the one who's going to be your moderator for today's session. My name is Shambe. I am currently a full-time OB-GYN practicing at Lake Ridge Health over in Durham. And I currently act as the Vice President of the Black Physicians of Ontario, and I'm happy to see everybody here for this seminar. Next slide. So the first thing we're going to do is an icebreaker. And what we'll do is we'll get everyone to just talk in the chat, and we'll go over some of the logistics of how the seminar will work. But if you just go ahead and put in the chat, tell us your name and currently where you're coming from and speaking to us from today. And then meanwhile, we'll just do the land acknowledgement. Perfect. Yeah, just go ahead, guys. Keep shouting out where you're coming from. That's great. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands with which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation peoples that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thanks, everyone. So the Black Physicians Association of Ontario, hopefully most of you have heard of us by this time. We're actually an organization founded by Black physicians many, many years ago who felt like they needed a space to call home, a common ground to talk about the issues that they felt affected them more so as practicing Black physicians versus the collective group of doctors that they were a part of. A lot of our advocacy work, and we stand here in front of you today, and we stand on the backs of giants and people who have come a long way from being one and onlys in their class to doing so much advocacy work and work to help to increase the number of Black physicians that we see in Toronto and in Canada as a whole. So this particular seminar we're putting on today is part of one of our working groups where we really try to work with learners to support, do a lot of outreach, and just to be there in different ways for the doctors who are coming up, current training doctors, and Black physicians all across Ontario. So you are welcome. Next slide. So in collaboration, you can go ahead to the next slide. So in collaboration with the BPAO is the BRPAO, so the Black Residence Physicians of Ontario, and it was founded in 2018 by Dr. Teresa Semalulu and became a subcommittee of the Black Physicians Association of Ontario in 2019. BRPO was created with the following mission: to represent and advocate for the interests of Black medical residents in Canada with a focus on mentorship, community building, and advocacy. The BRPO works closely with the BPAO and the Black Physicians of Canada to execute this mission in Ontario. And we welcome some of their previous members as presenters today. So we're happy to have you guys here. Next slide. So the objective of today's webinar is to work with everyone, on this call in terms of working towards the CARMs application process. So we've all been through CARMs. We know it's this big daunting thing that if you, have someone to walk through with it, someone to review your application, to answer questions, could be very helpful, which is the reason why we thought that this seminar would be beneficial. So we'll first start off. So to understand the CARMs process will be the first section that we talk about. Having an approach to requesting reference letters, which is very important, and learning to create a professional and comprehensive CV, which is also concise. So we'll get some pointers about that. and then an approach to writing your personal statement. I know we're all fabulous and interesting people, but it's one thing to know who you are and another thing to put it on paper so someone else gathers and understands that. The webinar guidelines. So we'll be doing a moderated Q&A session. So what we'll ask is if you can please type all of your questions related to any of the speakers or CARMs questions in the Q&A section. And then we'll try to address as many of those questions as we can throughout today's presentation. Then if you would like to engage more, which we do encourage, please feel free to use the chat function to do so. So they're using two different platforms today, depending on what you would like to mention. Then there'll be additional resources and materials, which would be emailed out to everyone. We have all of your emails by just signing up. And then, of course, we value your feedback. This is the first time we're running a seminar of this type, so we want to know what you thought about it, ways to improve, and just, general comments that you have to make about today. And we have people from everywhere. That's great, guys. Keep putting in the shout outs. So the first speaker that we have today is Julianah Oguntala, and she's here to talk to you about understanding the CARMs application process. So we'll go to the next slide. So Julianah is a PGY1, an internal medicine resident at the University of Toronto. She completed her medical degree at U of T, where she served as the Director of Finance for the local Black Medical Students Association chapter. She has also served as the chair of the Black Medical Students Association of Canada from 2022 to 2023. She's passionate about increasing the diversity of medical schools and providing support to pre-medical and medical students from underrepresented groups in medicine. As a resident physician, Julianah is excited to continue this work. And we are happy to have you here, Julianah, and you can go ahead and take over the mic.
Okay, thank you for having me. Can you hear me well?
We can hear you. You're slightly quieter.
Slightly quieter. Okay, I'll move a bit closer and I'll speak a bit louder. Let me know if you can ever not hear me very well. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started and just give an overview of the CARMS process and a little bit of what to expect. And I see that from the chat, there are people from all over, both from Canada and also people who studied abroad as well. And so go ahead and first we'll walk through the CARMS website. Can I get the next slide, please? And I will actually ask for you to stop sharing so I can share screen and then just go through the CARMS website if that's okay. So I'll share my screen. Okay. Okay. And so I found that when going through the CARMS process, I just thought that the CARMS process was just, can you see the CARMS website? Just want to make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Okay. I just felt it was a bit of a black box. And going through medical school in first and second year, we're pretty much told, don't think about CARMs. And boom, all of a sudden, third year comes. And then now it's at the top of your mind. And that's all you're worried about, CARMs, CARMs, CARMs. And so for me, one of the things that really helped to alleviate some of my stress was understanding what CARMs is before it was actually talked about at school. I went to U of T for undergrad, and just going through the website and looking through the the profiles of the programs from previous years. And so this is what the CARMS website looks like. And it's actually a pretty straightforward website to navigate, I found. And so when you go on here, what you're actually looking for is to go into the R1 main residency match. So that's what most of you here will be going through, unless you're going through the medicine subspecialty, family medicine +1, or the pediatrics. So most of you here, and this is what I went through, the R1 match. And specifically, you want to go under as you're an applicant. And so I know there are also people, if you're studying in a Canadian medical school, so automatically for the most part you would qualify to apply to CARMS, unless you are not a Canadian resident or you're not a Canadian citizen. But the criteria are all listed here for both IMGs and CMGs as well. And one thing I really want to point out is a program description. And at this time, when you go here, you can see there listed here is basically the quota of all the different specialties. And I was looking at these numbers, they actually didn't make sense to me. And I see that they're not fully updated just yet. And they will be just before CARMS opens sometime in September. So don't look at these numbers and be like, oh, there are only 48 internal medicine spots for the CMG stream, whereas there will be more by the time CARMS opens up. So I think these numbers are not completely up to date. But what I really want to point out is on the left-hand side of the screen are all all the different programs listed. And so even for myself, when I was in the process of trying to figure out which specialty I was interested in, I would go through here and would go over all the different specialties available and then just checking off each of them. No, I'm not interested in this, and I'll give myself a why. But I think at this stage, most of you are at a point where you've probably narrowed it down to one to three specialties that you will be applying to for CARMs. And so looking over here, for example, I'll pick internal medicine because these are the programs that I applied to, and going to, for example, McMaster, you can see there's an IMG stream, CMG stream, as well as the Waterloo stream. This year's description has not yet been populated, but you can go back and look at the previous years. And for the most part, the requirements don't change by much. The questions they'll be asking this year will be slightly different in terms of your personal statement. And from looking at the one from 2023, they're actually a little bit different. The questions are a little different, but for the most part, the values, the things about yourself you want to write are pretty much the same. And the questions, even though the questions might be different, they will elicit kind of the same response. And some schools have very generic questions. U of T is an example of that, where they're basically like, tell me a bit about yourself, tell me why internal medicine. And that's basically the crux of the question that they're asking. And some other schools like McMaster will have specific questions, such as what qualities make it, list one quality, and also tell us about your personal journey. And I will say, even if the question is not asking about tell us why this viewed, be sure to first answer the question first, and don't try to tell them about yourself or tell them about why that specialty if that's not what they're asking you for. And so this is the CARMs website, and you would be able to go through all the different requirements from both the administrative things, your citizenship, your photo ID, your reference documents, and basically seeing what all the requirements are. And I would recommend at this stage, before CARMs opens up, look through, although these are the requirements from last year, like I mentioned, they will still be quite relevant, and go through all the different programs and all the different schools you're interested in applying to, and just getting a good idea as to what all these schools require, and understanding what is the review process like, what kind of candidates are they looking for. And for the most part, if you scroll down, they're actually quite generic. A lot of the schools have very similar requirements in terms of they want a CV, they want to see your electives, your examinations, your ECs, your leadership portfolio, and all. But some schools might have some things that are a bit different from the other. I know some, for example, some surgical programs, even some surgical programs actually require your undergraduate transcript. So look out for that and be sure to request for those early on, so that it's not when you're towards the end of when the deadline is quickly approaching that you realize that, oh, I actually need my undergraduate transcript. And none of the internal medicine programs did last year, at least the ones that I applied to, but this year things might change. So be sure to go through all the different requirements. And if you need to make a spreadsheet, make a spreadsheet, especially for the ones that have very specific requirements. And basically comb through it. It'll take you probably an hour, 2 hours to look through the description of all the schools you're looking at. And also read through what are the qualities of the participant or of the candidates that they're looking for, from both the interview process in terms of your CanMed roles, your scholarly roles as well, and be sure to have a good understanding of that. So, like I mentioned, just in summary, most of the requirements are very similar, but some schools might have specifics that they're looking for. And so be sure to be aware of that so you're not caught off guard. And some of these requirements might need time for you to gather them, and so you definitely want to give yourself time to have those together. And so this is basically it here, and you can go through all the different programs, all the different specialties, and also all the different programs at the different schools, and keeping in mind that some schools have multiple streams. Internal medicine McMaster, there's both the Hamilton stream, and also there is the Waterloo program as well, and you will have to apply to those programs separately. So figuring out how many applications are you going to have to put through. Sometimes the questions are very similar, so by putting together your application from one site, you've probably already answered the questions for the other site as well. But be sure to, and don't just assume, double check and make sure that that's actually the case. And so this is it with the CARMS website. And so for the applicants, and the next I would like to go into is the timelines. And I'll stop sharing at this point since we've walked through the website. And then we will go. Can I ask Dr. Mutingi to reshare the PowerPoint? Or I think it was Mary sharing. We'll go over the timeline next. And In terms of the timeline, I think it's very important for you to keep this timeline in mind, especially since after the end of your clerkship season, or for those of you at a 3-year program, you're probably already having electives interspersed between within your clerkship year. Is to ensure write this down, write this out somewhere. The most important dates are to recognize when CARMS opens up, the 11th of September, and also when your reference letters are due and when the application itself is due. And so CARMS opens up on the 11th of September. So this is when you can actually start sending out your referee requests to your referees, your reference requests to your referees. You can start at the same time uploading things and filling in the different components of the CARMS website. And you have until October 17th is the earliest that you can actually start applying to programs and submitting applications. So there is quite some time. And so what I would recommend is right when CARMS opens up, this would actually be a good time for you to reconnect with your referees. And so you have between September 11th to November 29th when it closes. That's about 2.5 months. And so at this time, send them another email, and also we'll talk about reference letters. We'll talk about what to send your referees a bit later on. But this is the time to send them an email being like, hey, a reminder of applying. And this is my CV, and this is kind of a few patient cases that I worked on with you. Just a reminder, you've already agreed to write me this reference letter, and these are some of the information you'll need. Let me know if you have any more information. So you're sending it early, but keep in mind that a lot of the time your referees actually won't write your reference letters until towards the very end. And it can be quite stressful, but don't stress, they will get it in. You might need to remind them once, twice, maybe 3 times, and they might end up submitting it at midnight on the 28th, but they will submit it as long as you send it early on and you also send them reminders. And so November 15th is when your transcript and your MSPRs is to be sent by your faculty. So that is not on you to send. That is on your faculty to send, and you will see it just appear on your CARMS portal, and you don't have to worry about it. You only have to maybe reach out to your school if you don't see that uploaded by that time. But your schools, at least at U of T, they're pretty good about uploading that, and I haven't heard of anyone having any issues. And so November 28th is when your references are due. They do that because to allow you to be able to assign the reference letters to the schools that you're applying to. When your referees upload the letter, you then have to go in and say, I want this letter to be used by this school, to be seen by this school, for example, University of Calgary for general surgery. I want this letter by Dr. A to be used by the anesthesia program at UBC, for example. And so they're asking for the letters to be submitted a day early just to give you that time. Now, that's not a hard deadline. Referees are still able to submit after the 29th, but after the 28th, but before the 29th, but you might be in a crunch for time to try to assign the reference letters to the right school. And I would say probably the most important date to keep in mind is the 29th, and recognizing that it's not due at 11:59 p.m., but it's due at noon, 12 p.m. And so at this time, you need to have completed all the different components of the CARMS website. And there's a lot of administrative aspect to it, filling in things like your name, your background, your education, and now uploading your CV, all the different items one at a time. They're different aspects of them. It's similar to when you apply to medical school, where you have to talk about your ABS, your autobiographical sketch. You have to input the items on your CV one at a time. So this actually takes time. And on the CARMS website, there's actually more space to fully explain your extracurriculars more than you would have on your CV. On some of the CV with the programs, they specify no more than 4 to 5 pages. So that limits how much you can write for each of the different entries. And so at this point, but on the CARMS website, the character limit is much more. So if you want to explain things a bit further, flesh things out a bit more, you have the space to do that. But that also means you need time to do so. So I would highly recommend that November 28th is probably not the time to start uploading your CV. That's something you can do well beforehand and start and already have that uploaded well beforehand, at least a week, 2 weeks beforehand, because don't underestimate how much time it takes. It actually takes a lot of time. I remember having to go back, editing, making changes. I would make changes to my CV, and then maybe I would have to go back and make changes and also go back to the CARMS portal, making changes there too. And again, it's due 12 p.m., not 11:59 p.m. And something else I'd recommend is ensuring to submit well before this 12 p.m. time. In my year, we actually had the system crash sometime at like 2 a.m. on the day before it was due. Most of us were still up at that time. I was procrastinating submitting. I was just worried that if I put everything I put everything together as best as I could, and then the system ended up crashing. But thankfully, they extended the deadline. So I would definitely recommend. I don't know if this has happened before, but would definitely recommend submitting as early as possible, just so that you can avoid.
I think Juliana froze on us for a second. Give it a second for her to come back. I think she's just logging back in.
Okay, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you. Just you say your last thought again.
Okay, okay. Um, Yes, I was talking about the last week, taking that week it's due of if you're able to. And if you're not, hopefully maybe the day before, the day of, having that time off is will really help to alleviate the stress in finalizing things and ensuring things are well put together and well in line for you to submit. Um, and in that case, then, so November 29th is when you will submit, and then January 14th. So basically, from November 29th to January 14th, you basically forget about CARMs. I basically forgot CARMs existed, didn't really do anything, didn't really think about interviews. I was like, when interviews come out, for us, we had a week to prepare for interviews before the interview season actually started. And so I could afford to take that time off during the Christmas break. Um, Oh yeah, I seeing here that it's crashed prior to submission deadline, so I guess it's not new, and I'm not surprised. So because that's a time, literally probably thousands of final year med students are on there and trying to submit. So you definitely want to have your ducks in a row. And one thing I actually remember, and which is why I would highly recommend uploading your CV, and I mean putting in your individual CV entry items in well before the final week. Even though it didn't initially crash, it was quite slow. So it was literally taking 10 minutes just to enter in just a copy and paste and move on to the next entry item. And it can be quite frustrating. And at that time, I was really thankful that I already had things uploaded and I was just like going back and forth. There was really nothing more for me to do. And I felt bad for people who were just having to upload things last minute because it slows down so much. And just having things uploaded will actually give you the peace of mind, especially when you have to enter in, I don't know, lots of different and lots of many individual items. And so I really want to emphasize doing things earlier on. Your personal statements, if you're still finalizing, that is fine because there you can only have so many personal statements, but those individual CV entry items can be quite annoying and quite tedious to put in when your system is quite slow. And so then I was saying, between when you submit and when interview offers come out, depending on what your school is like or how much time you know you have to prepare, I basically took the Christmas break off and just really enjoyed that time. Didn't think about CARMs, didn't bother preparing until because I knew I had a week off before interviews started to actually spend time preparing. And so if you can afford to do that and try not to stress. It's out of your hands now. You've done your best. The next steps, there's really nothing you can do about it. You've already submitted, nothing just for you to wait. And then January 14th is when all interview offers would come out. So during between the 29th and the 14th, some programs will already start uploading the status on CARM. So you might start seeing interview offer for one program or the other. I know for internal, I think only one school, one or two schools sent out early interview offers, but all the different schools sent it out. The rest of the schools, you got it on the final day that it was due. I can't remember the exact day for us, and so it's on that day you log in, you see whether or not you got to offer to that school, and then you know how many interviews you have. And so you can see from when you find out your interview offers to when interviews start, you have a 4 day period. So you get it on the 14th, it starts on the 18th. And so from the 18th to the 9th, that's now your chance to be able to basically showcase yourself and as you interview across the schools across the country. And different programs do it differently with some internal programs, they give you an interview time and that's when you show up. Others allow you to select a time when during which you'd like to be interviewed. So many programs will have multiple days because they're just larger programs, and you pick which date and time you would want. And other programs are just smaller programs who just give you a time, a date, a time, you just show up whenever. But your schools will pretty much allocate that time, so it's free, so you have that free and can just do interviews. And I believe it will continue to be, it will be virtual at least for your year, this year. And so January 29th is when you can start ranking. And so your rank list is definitely something you should think about quite well. Spend some time thinking about it, recognizing what's important to you. Think about the program itself. Think about the city. Think about where you'd like to spend the next 2 to think about that and rank according to both the program and where you'll be living. And something else I'd also like to emphasize is also how the importance of ranking. There's I can post the link afterwards. It really explains what the rank process is like, and I think that video actually does a pretty good job giving you a good idea of what the rank is like. People think it's an algorithm that might seem random, but it's actually not. So actually when you rank, actually rank according to where you would like to go, not according to where you think you have a chance. Because if you rank, for example, you apply to 5 schools, you interview at 5 schools, and you rank these 5 schools, rank where you'd want to go. Don't rank just based off of how you think the interview went. Because if you want school A and you rank school A first, and then school A has 20 spots and they end up ranking you in their top 20, it's going to be an automatic match. And if school A doesn't end up ranking you in their top 20 spots, for example, and those spots get filled up by other candidates, the algorithm then goes to school B, the school you ranked second, and then it looks like, where do you fall on the rank list of that school? Well, do you rank high enough that not all the spots have been taken? And if you rank high enough that there's still a spot, it's an automatic match. So rank according to where you would want to go, and I would recommend applying widely and ranking all the schools, unless you're like, for family reason, for this specific reason, this is I would really like to be in these 5 sets of schools. I'm not considering anything else. But also there's also there are also consequences with that, in terms of the more places you apply to, the more places you rank, the higher your chances of you matching. And really consider what's important to you. Some people are like, I'd rather go here, if not here, they'd rather not match and then try again next year. And others are just like, I would rather just match anywhere. And I was like, I'd rather just match anywhere, so I applied as widely as possible. And so 29th, again, keep track of the time. 3 p.m. is when the rank list order list is due. And so I would just recommend, when the ranking period opens, starting, and whenever and it would automatically just submit it at 3 p.m. So I just ranked and kept going back, changing things as I wanted, and it just submitted at 3 p.m. And I think if you actually don't end up ranking, you won't match. So again, be sure to rank. It's a waste to have done all the work and then you don't rank and then you don't match. And so another thing as well too, when match day comes, for yours it will be March the 4th. Many schools do a pre-match day, and this is where, if you opt into it, you can opt into it on the CARMs website, where CARMs will actually release the match result to your schools the day before. So the schools know students who matched and those who didn't match. And if you opted into knowing whether or not you matched the day before, some schools, I know at least U of T does that, I'm not sure if other schools do, your school will speak to you about that, will actually reach out to students who don't match to let them know that it didn't match. And so for us, I remember we're told between 12 and 3 p.m., if you didn't match, you will hear from us. After 3 p.m., if you haven't heard from us, then you know you matched somewhere. Where, you don't know, but at least you know you matched. So I would recommend, I opt it just so I could have that peace of mind the day before, knowing I matched somewhere and I was okay with that. And I only applied to one program, so I knew I matched internal somewhere. I didn't know, but it was somewhere. So, but others are like, I'll just wait to find out the day of, and find out then. And then March the 4th, 12 p.m. is when the results are out, and you will find out which program and where you matched as well. So that's pretty much an overview of the timeline. I would say keep a list of all these dates. Keep in mind, when CARMS opens up, the deadline, don't forget, it's not 11:59 p.m., it's 12 p.m., it's noon. Take time off if you can, a day, that week, whatever it is, whatever time you can afford to take off, take it off. And also your referees, reach out to them early, send them monthly reminders. Most people end up submitting late. That's okay. They will submit, but just send them reminders and send it to them early on. Okay, next slide, please. And so I've already talked through all of these different components, and we'll talk about it later on. So I would say there are 4 main components to your application, your personal statement. This is really what tells the school, this is who I am, this is what's important to me, this is what I'm going to bring to your program, and this is what I hope to take out of your program, and this is where I see myself in the next 5, 10 years. And so, like I mentioned, some schools will have specific prompts. Other schools will just expect you to give them general things about yourself, and you can really personalize and write this personal statements as you see fit. And then your CV. Unfortunately, I found that on the CARMs website, they just have really general headlines, maybe medical education, they might have leadership, they'll have extracurriculars. But it's like, how do I structure my CV? I don't know. And so what I did was I reached out to um, and to medical students and now residents who had matched to internal medicine. I just asked, me I see your CV, and just to see how they structured theirs. And then I made mine into kind of a hybrid of all the different CVs that I received. If I liked how this person wrote the elective section of their CV, I copied that. If I liked how this person kind of structured the headlines of their CV, I also copied. Just picking and choosing from how people have done theirs. And then later on, we'll actually go through an example. The University of Saskatchewan has a really good detailed breakdown of how different ways to structure your CV. But key is you want to list the most important things, your education background, your electives, and really highlight. The headings can be really pretty much anything you want. I had the standard research, medical education, since that's really important to me. I had leadership, I had advocacy, since those are all things that are important to me as well. So that's how you want to structure it. And you also, how you describe the different entries is very important as well. You only have so many words because you're limited by space. Your CV might be 10 pages long, but people are probably only going to flip to the first 4 to 5 pages. So you really want to condense things and make sure the most important things are within those first 4 to 5 pages. And then your reference letters. Another very important part, asking for reference letters early. There's some programs that require you to have a reference letter from your core rotation. So internal requires you to have, at least at U of T, to have a letter from your third year rotation. So ensuring you have that, and you've already asked for that. And if you don't already, it's not too late to go back, think of who you worked with the closest, and request for a letter from them. And I would definitely advise, especially now, as you, most of the rest of your letters will come from your electives. As you go through your electives, if you haven't already done this during your clerkship, keeping track of 3 to 4 really poignant and pivotal patient cases that you worked with a specific person, and just center it around. I can share how I structured mine as well too, and you can share that, and you can really write that out to really give them an idea of the things you did with them. These physicians work with them. Many students, they, some people have like excellent memory, remember exactly what you did to them, but I really didn't expect anyone to remember exactly what I did with them. So I kept track of what I did and really describe things for them. This patient case, these are the different CanMeds rules that I showcase in these cases. And so that way when they're writing, I don't know how much, I didn't see my reference letters, I don't know how much of it they use, but my goal was to make things as easy for them as possible. So even if they just wanted to copy and paste, they could do that. And then your electives. You're probably at a stage where you've probably already arranged all, if not most, of your electives. And so what you do is very important. I know with different programs, for internal, it's like you need at least one CTU. Two is great. For general surgery, there's certain people you need to work with. There's certain people you need to get letters from. And even for other specialties as well, so you need to work with the PD. For internal, depending on how big the program is, not necessarily. You just need to work with people that you know that will you'll be able to work well with, and will write you excellent reference letters at the end of the day. And so, for example, for family, it's like as long as you have at least one elective in family, you can apply to family. And the thing with family is they want to see electives from many different specialties, because family is very quite broad, and there are definitely skills that you can pick up from all the different specialties that can be applied to that specialty. And for example, with radiology, it's like you're allowed a maximum of 8 weeks in one specific specialty. Most people don't end up doing 8 weeks of radiology. They might do 1 or 2, but radiology wants to see how they need at least something from internal medicine, an elective from surgery. They want to see how you perform on all.
We lost Juliana for another minute, I think. Her internet is bugging on her, but let's give her a minute and she'll probably pop back on again. There are some questions in the Q&A and in the chat. I just want to give Juliana a question. Chance to answer that. There you go. Okay, Dr. Mole's on it.
Yeah, so just in terms of, there have been two questions about observerships. I'm a big fan of observerships. I find that, especially if you're from out of, I think the problem tends to be Toronto. And when you're out of when you're out of the university and then out of province, it becomes harder to secure an elective. But for example, if, like, let's say you're at Dow and you're coming home and you're from Toronto and you're coming home over the Christmas break, there is nothing wrong with, you know asking someone to get connected with, I'm a general surgeon, so my world, like, let's say OB, and just say, oh, you know what, Dr. Mutungi, is there anyone I could observe? And there is somebody, and then they take you on. Everyone's happy to have extra hands over the holidays if they're on call. And yes, so you can list it as an observership, but you can also get a reference letter out of it. And if it's someone that has like weight in a program, then it actually goes a long way. Oftentimes people think, so a little bit contradictory to what Juliana said about having to do that some programs you have to do your elective with the program director. That tends to be some very subspecialized programs such as plastic surgery. It's not true for other, like, it's not true for general surgery. I always say, sorry, that's my child screaming in the background, that you need to make sure that if you're going to do that, that you have to come in hard and you can't miss. So you can't fly too close to the sun. Sometimes it's just working with someone who also has, name ID throughout the province. That's something that Abigail can talk to you a little bit about. Dr. Shami can talk a little bit more about to you. But I also just think that it's important, like, you can do, even if you do a rotation with the assistant PD, that also is helpful. But, I think it's understanding the culture of each school that you're applying to is helpful. Is Juliana back?
Yes, I'm back. Sorry about
Okay,
Yay.
that.
bye.
Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you, Dr. Mole. Sorry, Juliana, you can go ahead and finish your final thoughts and then we'll move on to the Q&A for your segment.
Oh,
Go ahead.
yes, I was pretty much done. I was just saying I'm open to any questions.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so, so much. I'm sure that walkthrough was very beneficial to many people to get that good bird's eye view and that timeline. I'm sure it was very helpful. So we'll go ahead and I'll go to the Q&A. There was a question. I think Dr. Omole answered it and is just chatting with the person. It was a question around people who've applied to CARMs more than once. Another question that has come up. So from Shama, is it best to only apply to one discipline, or is it all right to apply to two or three? Do different province um, do different province travel electives help your CV?
Mhm. That's a good question, and I would say for this, I'll start with the first one in terms of applying to one discipline. I think it depends on the specialty you're applying to. So, for example, here you're allowed a maximum of 8 weeks in one specialty. And so, if you're thinking of you want to do plastics, you're only allowed to do 8 weeks of electives in one in plastics. And many schools at U of T were allowed 16 weeks in total. So you had to figure out you had room to apply to other specialties if you wanted to. I know someone who applied to three specialties. They did plastics, they did emergency, and they did family medicine. Matt did 7 weeks of plastics, about 5 weeks of emerge, and I think only 2 weeks of family. It was actually family emerge. So you can definitely apply to multiple disciplines, but I would say you need to ensure that if those are quite competitive specialties, that you're a strong candidate for each of those. I myself was between internal and OB. By the middle of third year, I realized I only wanted internal, so I just went all in for internal and made things easier. I was worried about having to parallel plan for two things because it would mean based on the number of electives that were allowed and how many weeks I wanted to take off, I would only be able to do 7 weeks in internal and 7 weeks in OB. And I wasn't sure how competitive that would be. So it was good that I was able to decide on one. If you're not able to, definitely ensure that you're a strong candidate for each of those. If you're doing something like family and I don't know, an internal, where with family you're only, if as long as you do one elective in family, you're eligible to apply to these programs. So that might be a bit easier to parallel plan with. But if you're trying to do, for example, plastics and cardiac surgery, that might be a little harder. Not impossible, but definitely harder. And the different province travel electives help your CV? I would say definitely. I don't think it would hurt. What I've heard is people saying do one elective outside in the same province you're in, if your province has another school, outside of the school that you're at, and do one in the East Coast and the West Coast, or either or. So I ended up doing an elective at in London at Western, and then I did an elective in Calgary. And for me, initially, I was really open to the idea of leaving Toronto and leaving U of T, and going to these other schools really helped me to figure out what was important to me and which program would really fit what I was looking for. So it definitely wouldn't hurt to do electives at different schools. I know people who didn't go to the schools they ended up matching to, so it's not mandatory. It would definitely help. Even just for you to figure out what is this program like, what would it be like living in that specific city, especially if you're really thinking about that. So I would say any school you're seriously thinking about, try to visit that school. And so,
Thanks, Juliana. So if any of the other panelists wanted to comment on that particular question, otherwise we'll keep going through the chat questions. Yeah, Dr. Omole, go ahead.
It was actually a chat question regarding IMGs, and I just wanted to say that this is mainly CARMs for Canadian medical CMGs in a Canadian medical school. We will be doing something separately for IMGs, Mary, if I remember correctly, in November.
So there was just another question again about electives and visiting. So it has been exceptionally difficult to get visiting electives this year. Hearing that working with certain people in certain programs is important for matching is very concerning. Students last year were asked why they didn't do an elective at X school during interviews. How should we be navigating being judged for something that is out of our control?
Can I take that one, Shambe?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think I was going to actually ask Brianna if you could be specific on what the discipline is. I do think that most of the schools are actually a little bit more flexible now because during COVID, no one could do visiting electives, right? So I think there is actually a little bit more flexibility regarding, going to OBGYN. That's weird that they were asking that question. Dr. Shayemi is on, so she can also answer from being someone who's at Western regarding that. And Shambe, you can also, Dr. Mutingi can also answer from training at Toronto. I would say that there is a myth at general surgery that for you to get into Toronto, you have to work with Blue Team at Mount Sinai. That is absolutely not true. You can work with other people. For example, North York General is a great place to work because the assistant PD is there. And so that is also helpful. So I think sometimes there is this concept that you have to work with certain people, and that's not always true. And just regarding the visiting electives, it is difficult. And no one, you just say the truth. Like, I applied to 22, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to secure an elective here. There's nothing else. The other thing you can do is, if you can't secure an elective at that site, is to do, for example, as I mentioned, an observership with, if Dr. Mutingi is like, okay, I'm around during March break, or the summertime was a great time, you can come and work with me for, 1 to 2 weeks. And, she would probably be more than happy to talk to the PD in Toronto and say, the student was really, really great. Like, if they apply, you should really consider them. I think that's another way to do it. The other one is to do research at the school. I matched to MAC. I never went to MAC, but I did a research at MAC. And the research that I did was what got me into MAC. And we had no problems back in those days getting electives. I just didn't get my stuff in order enough to go there, but I still matched.
I think I echo Dr. Omole's sentiments just about being honest when you answer. We understand more times than not that it's not always possible to get an OA elective. They're very hard to come by right now. And with COVID, we had nobody doing electives at all. So if that question came up in your interviews, you can simply tactfully say, I applied to several electives at this institution and just didn't have the chance. I think it's different though when, let's say you're from Calgary, but all of your electives are at Toronto and in no other place, then it looks kind of like, okay, do you just want to go to Toronto, or are you applying here as another option? So I think it's just being tactful and honest with your response and not necessarily taking offense to it or feeling like you have to have done an elective in that place, because we know that it's not always possible.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for those contributions, guys. And I think my addition would be when I did do Obsgyn downtown, I actually didn't do a rotation there, but I did run a great rotation actually in geriatrics. Completely different specialty, but it was an amazing rotation and I got a really great letter out of it. And I think it actually went miles, even though I'd never met the team at the OB-GYN team there. I think that that letter was very helpful. So I think that that goes to show that as long as you have a good rotation in a specialty, either related or something you may be interested in, it can still go far. And then again, to just echo what Dr. Omole said about the IMG's questions, we do definitely have a whole other seminar that is coming soon. So please just stay posted to the VPAO, like our newsletters and the info, because we will have a whole section that will answer a lot of these questions for you guys. So I'm just going to go back to the Q&A. So there's a question that's asking, what is the difference between the first and second iteration?
I can answer this. So the first iteration, that is when, I believe it's only open to Canadian medical graduates. And so you would apply there and then you would match. So, and the spots that are left over after the first match, that's what goes into the second iteration. And I believe it's in the second iteration that IMGs are now able to apply. And so whatever spots are left over in all the different specialties, that's where those who didn't match in the first iteration and IMGs can then apply to the second iteration as well. So that's basically the difference. And they're staggered by time. So people find about their match March 4th, and then the second iteration starts shortly after.
Just in addition, the first iteration is for Canadian and US medical grads because they're both under the LCME. So it's the same match for both of them.
Thank you. A question here. What are your thoughts on CSIQ? I was informed that there were observations in certain universities that persons that self-identified as Black had problems matching. Anyone can go ahead and answer that.
I'm so sorry. What is CSIQ?
Yeah, so it's the Canadian Student Identification Questionnaire, and that's what CARMs is using to basically gather information about the demographics of those applying to CARMs. And the BMSAC has been involved with this, and we see that the way the responses to this have been used, we didn't really understand how they were using, especially the race-based data aspect of it. So currently, data has been collected, but a pause has been placed on the use of this data. So I'm not too sure about how those who are identified as Black are having trouble getting spots. I have no idea about that, but I do know that it's not currently being used to select for applicants. I know some schools, for example, the IM program at Dal, they've kind of worked out a pathway in terms of how they're using this. I'm not sure what their exact process is, but schools should not be using this questionnaire to select for applicants.
I would say that at, like, for example, I know U of T general surgery, you're a number. Like your name, there's no other identifiers for you besides just a number. And, you know, not like your preferred gender. And so they've actually noticed an increase in racialized and Black people in their program and people who identify as cisgender women when they've gone that way. So I don't think that that should deter you. I know also that U of T also has, if I correct, I'm wrong, Juliana, for internal medicine, a Black application stream.
That's right. But this is separate from the CSIQ. So you actually put in your personal statement, I wish to be considered for this pathway.
Great, thank you. And so if nobody has any more questions, I will just say thank you to Juliana, and then we'll move on to our next segment, to our next slide.